If you look at the satellite image today of Rafah, it's totally destroyed, burning families alive, being actively bombarded. All of it is unsafe. Israeli soldiers admitted not only to the fact that they kill people who cross imaginary lines in Gaza, even if you're a child. They kill doctors. That's why they kill nurses, because they want to ensure that not only have they killed that person, but they kill everyone that that person could have saved, could have fed, could have consoled, could have taken care of, could have treated. But also, different army units in Gaza have competitions between themselves to see who can kill the most Palestinians. Everything that we're seeing here is not an accident, and it's all related to like a very intentional long-term plan. Israel has been advancing into Syria's territory. There's a very clear agenda behind these so-called journalists, behind these so-called news agencies. They're actively part of the Greater Israel Project. Hello and welcome to episode 138 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you're entitled to ski because of 2,000 years ago.
Maybe like if now you own a ski, I don't know. Entitled to ski sounds weird.
Like if you're entitled to ski in Syria because of something that happened a couple thousand years ago.
Sure. Before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, please reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. You can also find us on Patreon, where you get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes and where we are also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod. In just 1 week, we had the Amnesty International report come out, the Human Rights Watch report come out, and Doctors Without Borders issue a report. All of these thoroughly researched, contributing new evidence to the ongoing scholarship on the genocide. And each one of them, of course, concludes that Israel's committing genocide.
There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And that's Vladimir Lenin, who we often cite on this podcast.
Do we?
No, just a little joke.
I have colleagues, friends in the US who were working on a case whereby Palestinian has sued the Biden administration. I have a press release here, which they shared with me. In a press release issued by DAWN, Palestinian families have sued the State Department to suspend U.S. military assistance to the Israeli occupation forces, confirmed as of December 17th. And essentially, the lawsuit is based on the State Department's failure to implement the Leahy Law, which prohibits U.S. assistance to any foreign military forces that are committing human rights violations, despite the fact that we have mountains and mountains of evidence of human rights violations committed by the Israeli military. The U.S. has continued its funding completely unabated. The violations that were cited to in the specific complaint here, supported by DAWN, refer to torture, prolonged detention without charge, forced disappearance, flagrant denials of the right to life, liberty, and security. They also reference genocide, the indiscriminate and deliberate killings committed by the Israeli occupation forces, and deprivation of items essential to survival, including food, water, fuel, and medicine. And in the lawsuit, the plaintiffs are asking for one thing only, which is that the State Department comply with the law requiring a ban on assisting the, quote, abusive Israeli security forces. A spokesperson for DAWN said, "For too long, the State Department has acted as if there's an Israeli exemption to the Leahy Law, despite the fact that Congress required it to apply to every country in the world. And as a result, millions of Palestinians have suffered unimaginable, horrific abuses by Israeli forces using U.S. weapons." Stephen Rickard, a former State Department official and a former senior staff member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who helped pass the Leahy Law, said there's only one country where the Department of State has a see no evil, hear no evil policy: Israel. Longstanding concerns that the State Department was not cutting off aid to specific Israeli units as required by the Leahy Law have been given dramatic urgency by the tragic ongoing crisis in Gaza. If the State Department will not comply with the law, then it's time for the courts to vindicate the rule of law and order it to do so. So this is just the latest in efforts brought before courts to pursue some sort of accountability. 2 episodes ago, we spoke with Damia Tahraoui, who's a French lawyer who brought a case in Paris for complicity with genocide and incitement to genocide committed by a French-Israeli NGO that was blocking, whose members were blocking humanitarian aid physically from entering Gaza. This is just to say that these cases are going to continue, and there are going to be many, many, many more of them in the years to come. And I really hope that they are able to take this particular case forward with DAWN, because we have seen how a prior effort to sue the Biden administration did not prevail in the US. The case was dismissed on the basis of political doctrine principle. That was the case that was brought by the Center for Constitutional Rights many months ago. That principle basically holds that the courts won't get involved with issues that they find to be of a political nature.
Yes, the court, famously apolitical in nature. That's why there's various levels of hierarchies all the way up to supreme. It's it's kind of like classifying Luigi Mangione a terrorist and then lifting the classification of terrorism for Giuliani within the same week. Right? It's like you kill a CEO, you are a terrorist to the United States government. But you overthrow a country and behead people, then you are what we call a soon to be NATO ally.
And that's something also that's happened since we spoke about Palestine 2 weeks ago, right? Syria has a brand new government.
Brand new is how they're trying to present this guy. But those of us who've paid attention to Syria remember Giuliani from the early days, the car bombings that he was responsible for in Iraq.
In addition, Israel has been advancing into Syria's territory, and the mainstream corporate media has been using the most delicate language to describe what is nothing short of an act of aggression under international law and a violation of Syria's territorial sovereignty. Never mind the fact that Israel has already occupied the Golan Heights illegally, which is Syrian territory, for decades now. But in this current moment, it is benefiting from the vacuum by advancing its troops even further into Syrian territory. And at the time of the recording of this episode, I don't actually know how much territory Israel has seized. And I also saw a video on social media of efforts by Syrian villagers to resist the Israeli occupation forces advancing into their village, and they were fired on by the Israeli occupation forces. So it's giving West Bank vibes. It's really alarming. And of course, what's even more alarming is just the complete silence in the Western corporate media, the presumption that this is ordinary or normal. You had Netanyahu standing on Mount Hermon saying, making some sort of a declaration about how their presence was just temporary and intended to just ensure that Israel's security was preserved. But if you're a Palestinian, you know that Israeli occupation is never temporary, and it will last for upwards of 70 years. And they're never going to leave. This is now a new normal. This is now facts on the ground. and they're not going anywhere. And in fact, that's just the new goalpost, that from where they will now move even further into Syria when they have their next opportunity to do so. So extremely troubling stuff. You also saw Zionists on X posting things like Mount Hermon is ours now. We're going skiing there. Like, give it up. Like, this is Israel now. And it's extremely alarming because it's extremely illegal and immoral and complete reversion of everything that this so-called international system is supposed to stand for. We purport that land theft is illegal, that conquest is no longer okay, that might does not make right. But what we see is, through the Israeli exception to all of these international norms, we see that that's just simply not true. And so I'm very troubled by this. In parallel, the situation in Gaza, defies all words. 7 children from the same family were killed in an Israeli airstrike on their homes in Jabalia. Jabalia and the north part of Gaza continues to be subject to siege now, which has lasted months, with almost no aid getting to them and relentless bombardment at all times. And what's really, really devastating about this particular incident, I mean, just to imagine 7 children from the same family, the loss is something which you can't even calculate. But just to know that these children survived for 14 months of genocide. They survived 14 months. They survived over a month-long siege on the northern part of Gaza. They survived the bombardment of the majority of all of the infrastructure in Gaza. And to know that they lived in absolute hell for the last 14 months of their existence, only to be killed in the most atrocious way, is so devastating. It's so devastating. And of course, we don't even have the opportunity to address every single person's story. But that particular story really, 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 really touched me. And in parallel to all this, we see that every day Israel's killing now probably around 50, 60, 70 people in Gaza for the last week. Those have been the numbers approximately. And you still see commentary from people like Pierce Morgan, who I watched a clip of just today, an interview with Candace Owens, when he said, I don't think it's genocide. It's only 50,000 people killed. At this point, I want to just pull my hair out, because we're now 14 months into this genocide. He has had numerous interviews with people who are legal scholars and experts who have most certainly explained to him that genocide is not a question of a minimum amount of people who are killed. But he keeps misleading his viewers into thinking that there's some magical number that needs to be hit before we can call this a genocide. And just this sort of Groundhog Day of people having to continue to rebut the same misinformation is making my brain break. It's not like if you rebut it once, then it goes away. It's like they keep doing the same thing, the same tired line that this can't be a genocide because only 50,000 people have been killed, irrespective of the fact that many more people have been killed than that. And that in and of itself is a reversion of what we're actually seeing and what the situation is. But just this notion that that word can't be used because it's not 6 million people. He doesn't know what genocide is. It's not his opinion. It's not up to him to opine on. He's not qualified to opine on it. So he needs to drop it, leave it alone, leave it to the scholars of genocide. Meanwhile, every day you have, as I just mentioned, organizations, scholars, experts adding their names and their organizations' names to the conversation. And the conversation is only moving in one way. There's only more people that are concluding that it is genocide. There are not less people today than there were a month ago, right? That's frustrating.
Did you see that CNN report with Clarissa Ward where she staged rescuing a Syrian prisoner days after the prison had been cleared out? And then there was a Syrian group that identifies misinformation in media that identified him as a first lieutenant in the Air Force, and he was responsible for having tortured people in Homs. And now they are doing fake CNN broadcasts trying to, intimate that CNN rescued a person from Syrian prison. They are constantly lying to people in order to advance US imperialism and this greater Israel project. And CNN has a long history of staging atrocity propaganda that goes well back even before like the 90s.
I saw her sniffing the backpack too. That clip came up where she claimed to sniff a backpack with chemical weapons. I saw that clip of her, liberating the prisoner before any of it came out that it was definitively a lie. And the first thing within 4 seconds of the video, I said, this is not real. Leaving aside that just would never happen. Just the notion that, there's now been, people having been liberated from prisons for days now, and she's not there to report on that. She's there to be the savior.
Someone said, it's time to get your nails done when they look worse than a guy being liberated from Syrian prison. What are we doing? What are y'all doing over there? Why is it that we're getting more accurate information from social media directly, from people undergoing genocide directly, than from these so-called news broadcasts?
Yeah, and I think, all of this is just consistent with the fact that there's a very clear agenda behind these so-called journalists, behind these so-called news agencies. I'll never forget the Wall Street Journal writing in May 2024 why Israel must invade Rafah, right? That was not just an op-ed by some wacky guy. That was the editorial board, right? So, I talk about it now and I'm getting like goosebumps because because now I know what happened in the aftermath. Israel invaded Rafah, began its tent massacres, burning families alive. It completely ethnically cleansed all of Rafah, where over 1 million Palestinian refugees were displaced. If you look at the satellite image today of Rafah, it's totally destroyed, making smaller and smaller the so-called humanitarian zones. Palestinians are now cramped into just tiny little pockets. Gaza is reduced in size. 36% of it is a buffer zone. Even more than that is a zone being actively bombarded. All of it is unsafe. But just this notion that a news source could take a position like that would implicate the lives of millions of people, that would have direct repercussions on whether people live or die, and if they die, how they are killed, for me was a clear indication we're not dealing just with people who, are committing the crimes of misinformation through omission, or telling you Palestinians die when Israelis are killed, like the sort of classic media biases that we often talk about. There's something much deeper and much more sinister. Like that article and the people that it influenced to inaction, and the people that it, whose minds were affected by that and adopted the position that, yeah, that's fine, that needs to happen, of course, why not, to me shows that they're actively part of the greater Israel project altogether. Like, this is not just, a little bit of anti-Palestinian racism, a little bit of dehumanization. We don't feel sorry for them when they die. We sympathize with the Israelis. This is like, we are a chess piece in the game of advancing greater Israel.
Yeah. And I'm thinking now back on the atrocity propaganda's greatest hits, which include like WMD's weapons of mass destruction, which obviously never existed. And then also taking the babies out of incubators, something that we have actually seen multiple times now in Palestine. And they just assassinated the journalist who discovered the story.
Mahmoud Balusha was a Palestinian journalist who broke the story on the decomposing NICU babies who he discovered in their beds at Al Nasser Hospital in the northern part of Gaza in November 2023. And Israel recently just killed him. Is one of those things very similar to the killing of Khalid, Reem's grandfather, where we got to know him in November 2023, after his granddaughter Reem was killed with her little brother in an Israeli airstrike on their home. And then we watched him for over a year, helping people in Gaza, volunteering every day, giving interviews, trying to tell people about Gaza, trying to get people to get to know who we are as Palestinians. And he was able to do this for a full year before Israel also killed him in an airstrike. And the situation with Mahmoud Balusha and Reem's grandfather shows that just how widespread the killing machine is in Gaza. Because not only are you seeing people lose their families, but then you're seeing them be targeted months later. And what are the chances of that if this is, just a war, and war is ugly, and war is this doesn't happen. These types of patterns don't happen in normal circumstances. Which leads me to something else which I think is really important, which is that the Israeli admissions that are taking place, but which are being completely ignored by the mainstream media, being completely ignored by the United States government, in parallel to all of this, are extremely frightening. You had Haaretz break a story a couple of days ago on how Israeli soldiers admitted not only to the fact that they kill people who cross imaginary lines in Gaza, deciding that if you cross that line, you're a terrorist and you can be killed even if you're a child. This was confirmed by the Israeli soldiers themselves. But also that different army units in Gaza have competitions between themselves to see who can kill the most Palestinians. Now, this is not something I'm telling you. This is something they're telling you. Israeli soldiers are admitting to this. Israeli newspaper is printing this. Now, I could have told you that this is what they were doing, because when you see the facts on the ground and you see what's happening to Palestinians, you can only conclude, the only logical inference is that all the civilians are targets and they are trying to kill as many people as possible. But when they themselves say it and everyone acts like it's not happening, that's the part that drives me insane, because they can admit to it. They can admit to it in the open. It can be published in a newspaper. The leading Israeli newspaper can publish it. And the US will still tell you they're just defending themselves, right? So if their own admissions are not enough to change the policy, what does that mean then? Right? That is so disturbing to me, that not only are people of conscience who are struggling against this not enough to break the cycle and to change the policy, but they themselves, Israeli soldiers committing these crimes, can come out and tell you exactly what they're doing, and it's still not enough.
Yeah. I don't know that Israelis have ever looked at a line and not thought it was imaginary.
Oh, good one.
They're like, this mountain in Syria belongs to me now. This river in the Jordan Valley belongs to me now. Like, they're trying to steal things with other people's names in the title, it feels like.
Yes. This also leads me to something Suzanne Abul Hawa posted, which I think is really important too. She said after they killed Reem's grandfather that she was afraid of what is going to follow, because Israel's modus operandi is to push the boundary to see what they can get away with. And once they are happy, they're satisfied that they've gotten away with that crime, then they will push it even further. So the classic example is, Israel would never bomb a hospital, and now they've destroyed the entire healthcare infrastructure in Gaza.
Who are the people saying that Israel would never bomb a hospital? Because those folks have not been paying attention.
Those folks were pretty loud and proud in October 2023, telling us that we didn't know what we were talking about. And we're like, no, we literally have endured Zionism on our bodies for over 7 decades. We know exactly what we're talking about. And now it's, well, yeah, they destroyed all the hospitals, but they had a reason to, right? That now this is the logic.
Their reason White supremacy.
She went on to say this is how they made their way into Rafah, the supposed red line, and turned every so called safe zone into an actual death camp. This is how they've been assassinating journalists. This is what happened with the World Central Kitchen workers. Remember the first time when, oh my God, the world went nuts, and even corporate media was covering it like Israel did something wrong. And then they had to send out an official representative to say Israel is so sorry for this. This was a terrible mistake. You know, occasionally when they do that. And she said, but the second time they did it, people didn't even know about it, didn't elicit any meaningful headlines or coverage at all.
ISIS is actually more apologetic to Israel than Israel is to anybody they've killed. Because there's that famous instance of ISIS having fired on Israeli troops and then like formally apologizing.
Oh, I don't know
So,
that.
oh yeah, very, very well known instance of ISIS literally firing at Israeli troops and then being like, "We are so sorry." And so it's like, wow, more accountability from ISIS.
She concludes by saying, make no mistake that this was an intentional assassination to test our reactions, to see if what they can get away with in terms of killing the next internationally known Palestinian with millions of followers. We all know who they are, those amazing people whose light on this earth shines too bright for the darkness of the Israeli soul. That's her quote. It's just a matter of time before they push the boundary again.
I've actually got one, like a story of them killing somebody who the internet has come to know and love as well. North of Gaza, Mahmoud al-Madoun fed the famished. They called him Chef Mahmoud for running a soup kitchen for the most vulnerable. He opened a school with a sign that said, "Please don't bomb," in both Hebrew and English. And on the morning of November 30th, his family reports that he was murdered by an Israeli drone. And he has been known on like TikTok and Instagram for his videos with Gaza Soup Kitchen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know him. I know him well. His brother works for UNRWA in the US, and he did nothing but wake up and feed thousands of people in Gaza every single day. And then like imagine what effect that has on the people who are not now going to be able to be fed by him, because not only is there a shortage of supplies, but it's also a question of like there's an immediate consequence in terms of now someone has to fill his spot, right? And you know that's why they kill doctors, that's why they kill nurses, because they want to ensure that not only have they killed that person, but they kill everyone that that person could have saved, could have fed, could have consoled, could have taken care of, could have treated. And that's why it's necessary for them, because the goal is genocidal, to kill the people who have the greatest impact in Gaza. And along those lines, not long ago, I saw a headline on Al Jazeera whereby an 11-year-old was crushed to death in Gaza while trying to get bread in the northern part of Gaza. This is reflective of the conditions. This is reflective of the overall environment. This is reflective of the fact that, of course, there's not enough aid. There's maybe 1 or 2% of what is needed, but also the fact that even the order, the structure that would be needed, that is needed in order to ensure the effective and safe delivery of food and water and medicine, is not there. In part because of the fact that there's not enough, and so there's this hysteria about if people are going to be able to feed themselves and their families, but also just this reflective of the breakdown of society and order itself. The UN has reported on a number, of trucks being looted as soon as they get into Gaza. That happens because Israel's intentionally withholding the overwhelming majority of trucks that are needed to feed people. That's intentional. That's all by design. That is part of the genocidal project. That's not a reflection of Gaza or Palestinians or Gaza's people. That's a reflection of Israel's policy in action. And I think it's important to specify that.
The settlers in the north were bugging out once they lost electricity for 72 hours. They have no idea what it's like to live under such pressure, and they would fold immediately. That's why many of them are gone from that area and are, I think I saw like 6 out of 10 will refuse to return. And speaking of people who refuse to return, there was a large number of Zionist soldiers who have resigned in this past year and who are failing to report for duty. So there's an article that came out on December 19th in El Mayadeen. Israeli military faces severe manpower crisis, hundreds quitting. Israel Hayum describes the crisis as particularly severe now as the Israeli military plans to expand its ranks to meet the numerous additional responsibilities by the war. Occupation Army is facing a manpower crisis, Israeli media reported, revealing that hundreds of officers are quitting the army at the height of the war. The military has yet to complete the year 2024, but it can be said that since the second quarter of the year, particularly in the past 6 months, approximately 500 majors have voluntarily left the army. The newspaper considered that this is a statistic that should, quote, shake Israel. This is an article from Middle East Monitor, December 21st. Israel expects to have 100,000 disabled soldiers by 2030, media report. So a lot of them are quitting because of their experiences doing genocide and the repercussions of that.
Uncivilized Media made a great clip, which they posted to their Instagram, about the clean break. The clean break is Netanyahu's 30-year plan to remake the Middle East. And it explains a lot of what we're seeing right now, but it goes all the way back to 1996 when a group of American neocons who served in different US government positions prepared a policy paper for Benjamin Netanyahu at the time. And the policy paper was called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm. In this policy paper, the objective is to ensure Israel's regional supremacy, and they outline like a number of principles that they're going to follow in order to ensure this. And one is that there will never be a Palestinian state, no matter what we agree to on the surface. And the second was that Israel would be immune to international pressure by becoming stronger. The third is that you would destabilize certain countries in the region, the first being Iraq, but then Syria also being included as well. And then he clips back to the infamous moment where Netanyahu's sitting before Congress in 2002 telling them, I guarantee you, if you take out Saddam, it will have positive reverberations over the entire region, which of course we know is absolutely false, but the American government listened to him. And of course this policy extended to Syria and Lebanon and then of course at the end Iran.
Because they were like, are there any countries that you think that we should just preemptively strike? And he was talking about regime change, and he said, not a matter of if, just a matter of when. And he was talking about Iraq. And then he was like, and we would also really like to see regime change in Iran. And so he's been gunning for this for quite some time. We also remember General Wesley Clark spoke about how a couple days after 9/11, he was at the Pentagon and he got information that the United States government was about to launch attacks against 7 governments in 5 years. And of course, the list is all of the governments that have been attacked in the last 15, 20 years.
This idea has come to take on many different names because the policy, loosely has been followed for the last several decades, but various people have gotten involved and contoured it and probably, refined it and postponed the dates and just sort of, fashioned it, to pursue their aims. It's probably, taken on different names, but just the point of this is just to show that everything that we're seeing here is not an accident and it's all related to like a very intentional long-term plan. There is no sort of explanation for the fact that in a matter of a day or so, Israel carries out over 500 airstrikes on all of Syria's military infrastructure, which is totally illegal. You can't do that. There's no excuse for doing that because the country next door has, gone through a change of power, but that Israel just sort of like presented it as a done deal. Like, of course it had to happen. It was inevitable. Let's move on.
Yeah, so there is certainly no excuse, but and you were probably just like exasperated, but you were like, there's no explanation. There's certainly an explanation for why they did it. And what the reason that they did it is because Syria used to provide an air deterrent to the Zionist entity, right? The Zionist entity could not just fly around in Syria's airspace. They've been shot down many times. And so that's why you saw the Zionist entity target the Syrian military air force infrastructure in particular, because there was an Israeli pilot who laid it out that they used to have to worry about the airspace. They used to have to study the like vulnerabilities, and no longer, because the Zionist entity's greatest threat when it comes to their air force no longer exists. That's their own words. And so they can now use Syrian airspace as a jumping off point to bomb Iraq and Iran.
Hind Rajab Foundation came out with another alert. They identified a Israeli soldier, war criminal, that was vacationing in Thailand. And
One of many, unfortunately.
they alerted the Thai authorities that this was the case, which now requires the Thai authorities to either arrest him and try him or deport him so that he can be face charges at the ICC.
Deport him to the Netherlands?
Yes.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah. So the principle, man, my Latin sucks, but there's a legal principle known as aut didere aut judicare, extradite or prosecute, which means that Thailand is legally bound to either detain him for prosecution under its domestic laws or extradite him to face charges at the ICC. They also filed a complaint with the ICC for his actions. This particular soldier is named Lidor Kandalkar, and he was seen in a video counting down before detonating explosives that destroyed a civilian home in Gaza. He was celebrating with his fellow soldiers afterwards, boasting about the destruction. And this is a clear evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity. In particular, the destruction of civilian homes without any military necessity is a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, including also his celebratory behavior, which just demonstrates a complete disregard for human dignity, also illegal. And these acts further violate the Fourth Geneva Convention, which protects civilian property during armed conflict, as well as constituting a violation of Article 7 of the Rome Statute, crimes against humanity. And they've listed also a number of other provisions which this conduct is in violation of. I won't bore you with all of that, but this is just to say that they're doing incredible work. If you're looking for a place to donate and you want to donate in the struggle for justice and accountability, please think about donating to Hind Rajab Foundation. They are making it their mission to go after every single soldier that has been involved in crimes against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and they are really taking on a global effort to do so. I know the lawyer who's leading up this effort, and really, really solid lawyer, and just like not sleeping and doing incredible work. So consider donating to Hind Rajab Foundation if you are looking for places to donate. I only say this because people message me all the time on Instagram being like, where should I donate? And, of course, there's so many people that are in need. And I think it's important to just mix it up and donate to people, donate to initiatives like this, donate to accountability. We need to be doing everything all the time.
Yeah. I just donated to the Samir Project in North Gaza, as well as Translating Palestine. They're doing great work to feed the children in North Gaza, where the Israelis' forced starvation is very severe. Folks, that's been another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at the Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com, and look for us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/palestinepod. That has been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.